I think the challenge that happened to the BDP is the death of visionary leadership, the absence of any new imagination of what the next 50 years would be like for Botswana.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Botswana's general elections were held October 30th. The results were nothing short of a political earthquake. Botswana has had the same ruling party for 58 years, since independence. Even by the standards of long-ruling post-independence parties in Africa, this is astounding. But days after the elections, President Masisi and his Botswana Democratic Party conceded defeat. The incoming president is a human rights lawyer and advocate named Duma Boko, who leads the opposition coalition known as the Umbrella for Democratic Change, the UDC. Botswana is a politically stable upper-middle-income country, a rarity in the region, and it has been that way for a long time, which can explain the longevity of the Botswana Democratic Party. But as my guest Ringisai Chikohomero explains, Botswanans have soured on the BDP, which is part of a broader global trend against incumbent governments. In our conversation, Ringisai Chikohomero explains why the BDP lasted so long in power, what to expect from the incoming government, and why Botswana's politics and economy matters to the global community. Ringisai Chikohomero is a researcher on political affairs, governance, and democracy in the Southern Africa program of the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, and we spoke last week. I learned a lot from this episode. I've always been curious about how Botswana became the stable upper-middle-income country it is and what these political changes portend for the future of the country and the region. As always, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or if you have suggestions of people I should interview or topics I should cover. You can always get a hold of me using the contact button on globaldispatches.org. Now, here is my conversation with Ringisai Chikohomero of the Institute for Security Studies. Well, thanks so much for joining me. Before we discuss the elections, I'm interested in having you give us a little history lesson. How was it that Botswana seemingly defied the odds of so many countries in the region, particularly landlocked ones, to become an upper middle income country as defined by the World Bank?
Botswana, the foundation from my reading and understanding of statecraft and how the first president, Seretse Khama, tried to build the country. It was really steeped in realpolitik and some pragmatic considerations. So he never really tried to experiment with what you find in many African countries who got independence around that time, about 57 years ago. He didn't try and experiment with socialism, communism, or he simply tried to look at what works for the country. Two things that happened in Botswana. The first one was how he organized the public service. So Botswana is a big country by landmass, but very small in population. I think they're about 2 million now, if my memory serves me right, maybe just over 2 million. So they didn't really have in-house capacity in terms of human resources capacity, the kind of technical skills that was required. So he designed and structured the public service and all the other sectors using expatriates as key skills and technical people. And he created a structure of skills transfer, but over a very long period of time. I think it was a 20 to 25 year period where select highly skilled international experts were headhunted, especially from the United Kingdom, and from the region. At that point in time, also most of the African countries were still under colonial rule. So you would find a lot of highly qualified Africans who do not have spaces within their countries because of the colonial structure. So he was able to attract this skill set.
He poached the African talent, it sounds like.
Yes, yes. He was poaching around and he was very intentional about it. And this really helped to build the state for him. He used a lot of this skill set from Europe, from within Africa itself, to build the state and to build the machinery, the bureaucracy, and key institutions. The second thing is to the extent that, and I think I refer to the population a lot because I think there was limited diverse voices. So it was really easy to rally the country behind one cause and driving towards a shared vision and a common purpose, unlike what happened in many countries in Africa. So he then was able to really build institutions that served the people. Because of this lack of serious political contestations around for a long time, there was no need to consolidate power in an extractive way. Rather, they became very constructive, progressive institutions that he built around that were really designed to respond to the needs of the country with a very, very clear long-term vision. From some books, people say he always had a 50-year kind of horizon when he was planning and structuring the country and the institutions. So you don't have a lot of conflation between political party and state institutions. You also do not have a lot of progressive weakening of the state apparatus to advance a political party agenda. You have a very cohesive state machinery that is designed to deliver. The third thing was, of course, the diamonds. And this really became what propelled the country forward. And the nature in which he designed the arrangements with the beers at that time.
Yeah, De Beers, the major diamond mining company.
Yes. He understood that they didn't have expertise and or the resources to exploit these minerals. At the same time, he also understood that he had a unique opportunity to create a win-win situation. So they structured the contracts with the beers in a manner that the Botswana government itself owns part of the beers. So it has shares in the beers itself, right? So the government becomes part of the extractive industry in terms of the exploitation of the diamonds.
Yeah, and it seems that arrangement makes it less exploitative than a lot of mineral extraction is in other countries in the regions. That seems to be sort of a very forward-thinking way of engaging with mineral extraction, particularly on diamonds.
Indeed. It was very, very forward-thinking and quite advanced for for the 60s. He didn't want to parcel it out to multiple companies or try and have some cronies, around getting to business around diamonds and have their own small mines, but really just put this in one vehicle. And also it allowed them to have access to other resources that the Bears had outside Botswana, like its other mining ventures in South Africa and the like. So they actually could tap into a lot of the De Beers resources beyond just the technical skills. So then that built the economic basis that springboarded Botswana to being an upper middle income country.
So it's fascinating as you describe it because, post-colonial liberation parties in the region always do very well for a very long time. But for all the reasons you described, Botswana's Democratic Party lasted 60 years, which is just astounding, even by the standards of post-colonial liberation parties. So what happened this year in this election that caused such a political earthquake to end that enormously long streak of power by the Botswana Democratic Party?
The first point, and when people want to split hairs, they'll say BDP, Botswana Democratic Party, is in itself not a liberation movement. It was the party that got into a settlement agreement and transitioned into the ruling party in Botswana, but not on the basis of a liberation struggle. And that is a very important distinction to parties like ZANU-PF of Zimbabwe, African National Union of Zimbabwe, or of Frelimo, or Chama Cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania. Because some of the seeds of the failures of the post-colonial governments are found in the design of the liberation movement and the liberation and the protracted struggle itself. So that's the first distinction I'll make. The second bit is to say, now, for 58 years, I think the challenge that happened to the BDP is the death of visionary leadership, the absence of any new imagination of what the next 50 years would be like for Botswana. And the third thing for me would be a comfort zone, becoming very comfortable in their position as the dominant ruling party with all these years. The fourth thing is you don't have a lot of societal ruptures in terms of civil unrest, in terms of a lot of emergence of strong opposition parties up until the last 15 years. So there has been a lot of complacency. There has been, the country is doing well, the economy is on the right track. So there is really, for me, what killed the BDP is the lack of imagination. You get to a point where when you look at the BDP manifesto, the party manifesto for 2024, it was really hollow. There was nothing besides, to be sarcastic, besides saying, look at us, we've been with you for 50 years, we are good and we can keep on. There was really nothing to say, look, this far we've been together, but the next years are going to be transformative. The next years are going to be innovative. The next years are going to find us diversify the economy and expand the employment base and production base. Which brings me to the third point on this, which is actually the growing unemployment in Botswana. The youth unemployment in Botswana stands between 34% when you go by the conservative figures to 44%. And the diamond prices haven't been performing very well in the last few years. So which means the revenue base for the government has been shrinking and they have not diversified the economy. It's really a commodity-based economy and a single commodity dependency at that. So they found themselves in a very difficult place that they could not easily extricate themselves. At the same time, from a public management perspective, I would say when you have a government that has been in power for that long, it also means you have a civil service that has not been challenged in terms of delivery, in terms of being innovative and being efficient. And for me, I think this complacency within the ruling party also found its way within the public sector. Because some of the key complaints that you find, or the key topical issues in this year's election, were the high unemployment, the budget deficits, and the lack of key service delivery, especially in the health sector and the education sector. So for me, this is what happened to the BDP.
And it's interesting. I look at this in the context also of this global wave we're seeing against incumbent parties. And, Botswana seems to be, just by sheer scale of defeat by the BDP, one of the, strongest examples of this anti-incumbency wave that we're seeing globally. But obviously, of course, there are more pressing domestic reasons, for reasons you just articulated. I'm interested in learning a bit from you who the incoming government is, the Umbrella for Democratic Change, and Duma Boko. What do we need to know about him?
Sure. So just to take you a step back, one of the nuances that I think have not really been grasped in terms of understanding what has happened to the BDP is the actual number of votes cast in their favor vis-a-vis the seats that they got. So the Umbrella Democratic Coalition got 37% of the vote, and BDP got 30% of the vote. But in terms of seats, BDP only has 4 seats, and the UDC has, I think, 37 seats. So that's a very interesting dynamic. I mean, of course, it's more academic than of any input, but it's something that to keep at the back of the mind. But coming back to who Advocate Boko is, so what we know of Advocate Boko is he has been in, to use the Southern African parlance, in the trenches of opposition party for a while, I think for the last 10, 15 years. And I think people like to emphasize the Harvard-trained lawyer. I mean, he's a University of Botswana-trained lawyer with a master's from Harvard. I think there's a difference there. And he has been able to excite and galvanize young people and the new voters by the promises, by the alternatives, by really highlighting, of course, emphasizing on the failures and the complacency of BDP and the opportunities that change would bring. One of the things that you see when you actually read their manifesto is they promise quite a lot in terms of increase in minimum wage, in terms of expanding service delivery, in terms of diversifying the economy. At a point where the current basis of the economy, which is diamond, is not doing so well on the global commodity market. So we have a very charismatic Christian leaning leader who, at one point, if you follow the kind of politics that is happening in Southern Africa, is also a product of what is called the Brenton House Foundation. I do not know if you are very
No,
familiar with
explain. I am not familiar. Brenton House, explain.
the Brenton House Foundation, spelled BRENTHURST Foundation, is really an establishment of the Oppenheimer, South Africa's richest family. So they have this foundation, which is like a think tank, and it is really what you'd call a neoliberal, left-leaning kind of establishment, which has been seen as the front of developing young leaders within the region for the purposes, if you are to follow the liberation movement's arguments at the moment, for the purposes of an imperialist or a neo-colonial agenda. And the strong association that Advocate Boko has with South Africa's Democratic Alliance, which is also a very liberal party with an Afrikaner, heavy Afrikaner foundation, does very little to change that image. So there is, on one hand, where he is seen as part of a product of the Oppenheimer Foundation, of the Oppenheimer family's drive to entrench its power within the new ruling elites in Southern Africa, which includes, as part of its members, Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema. It also includes one of Zimbabwe's most fiercest opposition leaders, Tendai Biti, and a lot of other opposition members. So you find that it has become a kind of a think tank for opposition progressives, so to speak. But at the same time, it is easy to be attacked by the liberation movement as a neo-imperialist agenda to kind of change the configuration of power within the Southern Africa region.
So Duma Boko will take power. We have this, new opposition party that is now firmly in control in Botswana. What international implications do you see, if any, for this change in government in Botswana? Most of the people who listen to this show are people who, one way or another, are invested in international affairs, global development, international relations. One way or another, they're interested in how local political changes like this might have global reverberations. What might you point to suggest how this new change in government after 58 years has broader implications beyond Botswana?
I think the first thing is what is going to happen with the arrangement or the agreement between the Botswana government and the BS. The previous BDP government has been trying to push for increased shareholding of the Botswana government in the BS, reconfiguring the contract altogether to make sure that a significant portion of the produce within Botswana are finalized and processed within the country. So it was seen as a more lukewarm nationalist and nationalization of diamond, or a low-key intention towards nationalization. And the new president seems to be saying, yes, we're going to negotiate, but we're going to negotiate on a win-win fair basis. So that's the first thing. And I think it's what he's trying to say is he is pro-investments, and he is more geared at diversifying the Botswana economy, open it and enlarge it and encourage more investment within the country. That's the first thing. The second thing, along the same lines, and it's not really a new idea, but it was tinkered with during the BDP time, is to say, because Botswana is still a small country in terms of numbers, how do you attract skill again for investors? So Botswana has all the other facets that are good for international investment. It has very good, stable institutions. It has rule of law. It is you can have stability and guarantee of enforcement of contracts. It has energy. There's no shortage of energy. There's no shortage of the key ingredients for manufacturing industry and the like. But one thing that it lacks is manpower. And one of the things that he has said is to say, we need to regularize the Zimbabweans. Because you might know that the biggest brain drain in Southern Africa has happened within Zimbabwe, which is also at some point the country with the most educated
Yeah.
Africans. So he is trying to create an environment that attracts, once again, I suppose after the model of Sekama, the first is how do you attract the brain thrust of the region to your country and then use this as a basis to attract international investment. It's the first thing. The second thing is really pro-neoliberal agenda. I mean, he was already speaking of the LGBTQA rights, which is something that has faced a lot of pushback within the region. He's speaking of being a friend to all and opening up, intensifying their cooperation with the United States and the United Kingdom and the European Union. So this is going to be more the kind of trajectory that we are going to see going forward.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time. I was really glad to speak with you. This was, a political earthquake. Didn't receive too much attention here in the United States, but it's worthwhile to speak with you about and to learn more about. So thank you.
It's always a pleasure, and looking forward to talking at some point again.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.